Welcome to episode 10 of the Riser Sports Podcast. I'm Greg Strong of the Canadian Press, joined as always by Winnipeg Sun sports editor Ted Wyman. And today we'll be joined by curling legend and longtime CBC personality Colleen Jones. Before we get to Colleen, let's welcome Ted back to Canada after yet another vacation down south. Ted, I'm wondering if you pitched becoming Postmedia's North Mexico correspondent.
Yeah, I was wondering if they might need a curling reporter down there, but for some reason, there's not a lot of curling in Mexico. They need to grow, I think, in their appreciation of sports.
Yeah, let's intro our guest, Ted. Here we go. We are thrilled to be joined by one of the best curlers this country has ever produced, six-time national women's champion Colleen Jones. Colleen recently retired after a near four-decade run at the CBC, where she covered news, sports, human interest stories, anything and everything in her own province of Nova Scotia, as well as many stories abroad. Colleen, welcome to the Riser.
Nice to be with you both, and nice to have you, Greg, in my home province here in Nova Scotia, where sometimes I feel like I know everybody here.
I could see that, yes. Well, glad you could connect with us tonight, and I think Ted's going to start us off. Teddy.
Well, Colleen, surely everyone knows you in Nova Scotia and in all of curling circles across Canada. I think my association with you goes back to 1996. That was when I covered my first Scotties in Thunder Bay, and you were representing Nova Scotia for one of your 21 appearances in the Scotties. So my first question for you is, how much different is the sport of curling now than in your heyday? And even more so, how much different is it since you first started playing at the national level, which I believe was in 1979?
You're right about the 1979. I mean, the game has evolved and changed. It seems like every 5 years there was a new rule to get used to. When I started in 79, they had just introduced playoffs. And it caused quite a scandal in curling that they thought, no, the winner of the round robin should be the champion. So even that took both the curling fans and curlers a while to get used to it. And I remember in 1980, our team won the round robin. We lost to Marge Mitchell with Ernie Afaganis on the ice and Don Whitman and Don Duguid in the booth announcing the game. We were nervous as anything. But when we lost the game, fans were livid that we even had to play the game because they were still anti the idea of a playoff. So there's one evolution. I was curling with a corn broom back then. Then all of a sudden horsehair came in, and after horsehair came, what we're using today, or an evolution to it. And then the curling rules. I mean, every time I turned around, there was a new rule to learn. Luckily, I didn't play in the era of 12 end games, but like just adjusting when you go to not championships, but Canadian mix, for example, this year, 8 ends. It was like, oh my God, this is hardly a game. I need 10 ends. And mixed doubles is a new game. So it's a sport that has just kept on evolving from the no rock rule to 3 rock rule to 4 rock rule. I never thought there'd be a 5 rock rule. There's a 5 rock rule. Like, I don't know what's next for the evolution. It'll be something.
Colleen, I wanted to ask you about curling coverage and where the sport is at. I mean, when I first started covering curling about 20 years ago, the media riser took up several rows at the arena, and those rows were packed with journalists and broadcasters. Over my first 4 days here, I've got to say, sadly, I was literally the only journalist on site. Is curling, given that so many clubs are hurting right now, attendance and ratings are in decline with a few exceptions, and the curling media has shrunk so much, is it a bit of an existential crisis happening now with curling?
Well, that's a really good question, and I wish I had the perfect answer, because I think it's a perfect storm of all those things you just mentioned. With the declining media landscape and the lack of incentive to kind of make sure media comes here and covers it, to kind of, I think that even when I look at having just been at the Brier, and they did great attendance-wise, and the arena was electric when Team Saskatchewan and Mike McEwen went on the run. how do you duplicate that at every event so that there is an automatic sense of urgency? They've done some things in curling that are really good, like I guess the light show at the beginning. They try to involve the fan more. I really think you got to do a bigger reach out to the fans to make it not like an NBA basketball game, but a little bit more noise, a little bit more excitement, a little bit more incentive for the fans to enjoy the experience. I mean, that's who you're doing this for. This is for fans and for a television audience. I think the television audience is still reasonably strong, maybe not as big in the Grand Slams as they would like. The Grand Slams becomes the exact same team every weekend. So even for a big curling fan like me that wants to watch it all the time, that even gets a little bit hard to watch. So I don't have the solution. I guess there's just got to be just a little bit more energy in the arena. And some of that is like what Guy Hemmings used to bring to the sport. And that kind of, the fans loved him, right? We need that kind of real love affair, I think, with the curlers and the fans, and more of those personalities.
Well, I think you nailed it there, Colleen. In all honesty, it's been when you talk to people. I remember at the Olympics in 2022, you and I were both there, and I remember talking to some executives, and they were talking just like that. There's those World Curling Federation people, and they're talking about how, especially the youth bubbles, they had an opportunity to create that kind of atmosphere. Maybe have music between every end. Maybe they just were talking about some pretty radical rules, which curlers immediately were like, no, absolutely not. This sounds terrible. But the ideas are there with some people to truly radically change it to become more of an entertainment product. And I think it's really interesting that you said that. And I'm wondering if you think that's possible to take a game that's been so sort of stayed for so many years and make it that something a little more exciting.
Yeah, I mean, even, I don't know, could you have cheerleaders? Could you do something more exciting with the uniforms? Rather than the exact same uniforms every year that everybody wears. And really, they discourage in the rules slamming of brooms and cursing. I don't think you should curse, but you need to give the players the freedom to show all of their emotions. You might remember recently Anna Hasselberg, when she lost one of the Grand Slams, and she kind of slammed her broom a couple of times, and I saw nothing wrong with that. I thought, good for you. This means something to you, and you just showed us that. But yet there was some pushback on that about, she shouldn't have slammed her broom. And you're going, come on. I would love to see more of that kind of dynamic. And now the other thing is the separation between the haves and have-nots in curling provinces. So when you're at the Brier and the Scotties, it's become such a have and have not. You need a good Cinderella story like what Northern Ontario went on, like Jamie Cooey went on for Northwest Territories, like Prince Edward Island was doing at the men's. You need those kind of ideas that a Colleen Jones from Nova Scotia can win a Scotties. It just helps create a narrative. And it just seems like in the men's, we've had Gushu, Botcher, and Cooey at the top three winning the Brier, which is fabulous. They're great, 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 great teams. It'd be nice to see every now and then the underdog come and do something. How do you do that? You try to create an equal playing field in terms of training centers across the province, across the country, of which there is not really, right? There's not enough to encourage the hundreds of kids in Newfoundland and Labrador who've taken up the sport because of Brad Gushu mania, and he's adored, and everybody wants to be a Brad there. And yet, do the kids there get enough of quality training that could help make them the next Brad Gushu? So anyhow, I'm all about Cinderella stories and narratives at these things, and you need to have those kind of storylines. and Carrie winning for the last 4 years. Before that, Jennifer Jones. Rachel Homan is a fantastic story right now, in my opinion, just because they're so dominant, so good. And I think that that's a new storyline that Rachel's sort of, yes, she's always been there, but now she's back into the Terminator, right? So I'd be, I think creating that kind of buzz. I do see Curling Canada doing a better job at creating a bit of a star system. So they have an ad right now on with Brad Gushu that was nicely produced, and ditto for Carrie Anderson. Create those stars in the sport. And I know for years before that, that was something that there was a hesitancy about, because they thought the event stood on its own, and whoever showed up at the Brier, that was going to be good enough, whoever the Manitoba rep was. So yeah, I think storylines and narratives to create a buzz is important.
Colleen, I'd like to ask you about your work with the CBC. How did you learn about some of the more quirky stories that came up over the years? And how did your media experience as an athlete help you on the other side of the mic?
I've always believed that everybody's got a story to tell. So that just was bred into my bones from the youngest of ages, really. I didn't come from a journalism family, but it was just that everybody's got a story. And as a reporter, it's your job to convince a number of people that said, I can't believe you want to do a story on me. I'm there. Are you kidding? You're 102 years old. Doris was her name. She's passed since. And her birthday wish was to have her first airplane flight and see Nova Scotia and what it looked like. And when she was up there, she was like, oh, this is so beautiful. And it was just, it makes me cry thinking about her. And she didn't think that was a story. She was like, oh, I don't know why you'd want to do a story on me. I'm going, because you're 102 flying an airplane for the first time. You're a rare breed, Doris. I'm doing a story on you. And everybody I would find, I'd have to go, this is an amazing story. And sometimes I would leave whatever shoot I was on and go, they don't even know the work they're doing is so great. Like whatever they've volunteered their entire life doing. So I got stories from every place that my dog park people would say, oh, she's on the hunt. When I do, what's new with everybody? Tell me what's happening. What have you seen? What are you doing? Even when I'm out walking, when I'm grocery shopping, I talk to people. I'm always talking to people. So I'd get stories that way. And then people would call and they'd say, I don't know that you're going to think this is a story. I said, I already think it's a story. Go ahead, keep going. Tell me more, So I think I found wisdom in the people I was doing stories for. And I knew I just had a sixth sense, I think, about doing real people and real stories. That was the part of what I love to do. And then when it would be storm season here, which seems to be coming across more and more, to see the way, I always marveled at the human spirit in action, that you could see people helping each other, that they were devastated because the roof had just blown off, but it was not their main priority. Their main priority was that they were alive. Those stories of all the kind of hurricanes or floods that I got to cover through the years, it was just every corner you turned was a story of human triumph and suffering at the same time, because maybe they lost their house or their business, things like that. So, yeah, I think that was, we used to, growing up in a big family with 9 kids, and it was, everybody sharing stories at the supper table and hearing what all your siblings had gone through the day, sort of was a baptism in storytelling and realizing that everybody had a story.
All right, well, switching back to the other hat, the athlete hat from the media hat. I recently read a tweet from you, and it said you started curling 50 years ago.
I know.
You're so heavily decorated with 6 Scotties wins, 2 world championships, mixed titles, so much. You are so well known across this country in the curling world. And yet this has been your favorite year. Can you take us through how that is possible?
Well, because I didn't see it coming. All of a sudden I was asked to coach Team Heather Smith, and it was so joyful and meaningful to kind of try to take what was in my head and heart and give it to other people. And then watching them blossom as a team and to beat Christina Black, who was the favorite. She's done well at the Scotties the last couple of years, was so rewarding. As opposed to when I was throwing rock, I just expected myself to make it and I expected myself to win. But we went in as an underdog and we worked all season hard to find who we were as a team. So that was meaningful. Getting to play at the Canadian Mixed again as lead, Paul Fleming skipped, and my son Luke was on the team, and his fiance Marley Powers. I was pregnant with Luke in 1993 when I won the Canadian Mixed. And so I don't know how much angst and curling worry I passed on to him in utero. I think it was a lot. But so that was beyond, even when I got the jacket and we took our team photo, I had the biggest goosebumps a person could ever had. I was playing lead, Swift Current, back where, it was a big win for us to win the Canadian Mixed, and that I was pregnant at the time. And then going as a mom again to the Brier, I remember looking at my husband going, is this going to be our life? We're going to be following our son around to a Brier. What a treasure. This is a dream vacation. I don't want to go to Mexico. I don't want to go to wherever you were, Ted. I want to go to a Brier every year for the rest of my life. That was, and it was the most, again, and when it's me curling, I don't feel these emotions. When I'm watching him, I feel sick to my stomach. I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm nervous. I'm excited. It's just an adrenaline rush. And then just being at the Canadian Mixed Doubles, brand new crazy sport in my eyes. I know we've seen it at the Olympics and everything, but coaching Marley and Luke there, trying to figure out another piece of the puzzle of how do you play this game? How do I make them better? In a game that isn't foreign to me compared to four-person, that was one of the biggest challenges. That alone would have been enough of a challenge going to the Canadian with them. So to have those 4 opportunities, and then through it all, I just kept talking to fans, and they would tell me stories about one person saw me in 82. That's a long time ago. And another person told me the story about how their son had autism, never spoke. He came up to me in Fredericton. It made me cry. And he said, he watched you in the Scotties starting in 99. He heard you yelling hard, and hard was his first word. And he took up curling, and he hasn't stopped curling and talking since. That was mind-blowing about the power of sport and the power that you had through somebody watching you on TV that you didn't know you even had. So I just heard so many stories at all of the 4 events, from Swift Current to Regina to Calgary, and to, where was I last? Fredericton. And now back here in Sydney. I'm talking to so many people that either didn't know me or knew me or saw me. And that's unlike any other year. And it's made me so thankful for every experience I've had in curling that led me down this road. It's been a road I didn't know I'd ever be on. And here I am still on the road.
Colleen, I've been in many scrums and on many conference calls where reporters have seemingly been afraid to ask tough questions. In our scrums together, this has never seemed to be a problem for you. Tell us about your approach.
I think I walked a mile in their shoes. So it's just, there are hard questions. It's like, what went wrong? Is it, or what do you do next? How do you right the ship? I do have respect for the fact that they're hurting, because sometimes it's a loss that's just knocked them out of something. And yet you need to find out the why and the what and the how, and so I try to make sure I get what we both need, which is the heart of the story, which might be an emotional clip. It might be a hard clip. It might be an FU clip. You don't know what you're going to get, right? But it's the job to kind of remember that you're trying to create that narrative through the work that we do, which is telling a story that if you just do a a story that's going to be like a hockey cliche story, it's not going to get any kind of traction or readers that you want to get. So it's trying to find a way. Sometimes you might start with something softer to acknowledge, or you might start with, I know that was hard, but at the end of the day, and especially when you're at something like an Olympic Games, where you only have them for 2 minutes, like you've got to get them to move to the heart real quick. You don't have time for any, what do you want to call it? You don't want a bad clip, you know. And I'm always talking, it's funny. I mean, I've always separated people into good talkers and bad talkers, not just curling, any sport I've done or any story I've done. And when I leave, sometimes I'll either turn to the cameraman or I'll say to my husband later, the producer back at the plant, they were good talkers. We got gold. I actually score it based on gold, silver, bronze, like we're at an Olympic Games. But I just think a reporter's job is so important. If the fans don't come, then you don't really have a show. And if the reporters aren't writing about it, then no one knows it's happening either. So it's this managing of all three, trying to get stories out, trying to get fans out, trying to get in this case, a good product on the ice, or whatever the sport is the product's got to be good. You're selling bums in the seat, not you and I, not us as reporters, but that's what the sport is trying to do. Make sure that people come, more people curl, more, you know, all that sort of stuff. So I like it when you start with a hard question, though, Greg. Yeah. Then I can do something as a follow-up that almost seems like a good, there's no good question. Thank you. I got a welcome to Cape Breton.
Oh, there you go. Well, I remember back in the day, Colleen, you know, from even in the 90s and early 2000s, you're having your greatest run, that sometimes like people would be kind of rude in talking about you outside of the event,
Yeah.
and criticizing you. And a lot of it was for silly things like chewing gum.
Yeah.
And that was mostly before the rise of social media keyboard warriors. So I'm curious how you think these average, hardworking women who compete in big events now and are therefore on TV a lot deal with the online critics in this day and age.
Well, we used to have this thing where TSN would broadcast live comments, and it was hateful. And we realized, geez, don't even look. I don't even remember what the program was called that they used. You used to get also handwritten letters. And if a person's going to handwrite a letter about how much they hate you, that's trouble, right? That's like, oh, God. People were a little more direct back then, too, to say, you know, you'd come to your face and say you'd chew gum like a cow. You have to have, I think, as an athlete, some broad shoulders and lots of confidence. And I think you can't allow yourself to look at criticism or attacks that might be personal. You can't take it personally. And I think I was always pretty, you know, my mom would always say, what was that rule about sticks and stones may break your bones and names and faces will never hurt you? Now we know names and faces hurt you too, right? But back in the 70s when it was happening, or through the 80s, you kind of were oblivious. I think there was a turning point for our team where we got a lot of grief from Ray Turnbull. Just we felt like he didn't give us any love or respect, right? I mean, we were okay with that. We realized he had a job to do. But then Ray turned a corner and said, you know, this team's good. And when I think he turned a corner like at our third Canadian, and we had just won a Worlds too. And he literally came down to us and said, you guys are just super consistent all the time. Like, it might not be flashy, but you also don't miss. So you're going, okay, geez, yes, we made it. So that was, but even before that, when I used to work with Don Whitman and Don Dugan, CBC got a lot of hate mail for that. And how dare I contradict Don? Don loved it. And Don and I have been dear, dear friends for a long, long time. And I loved working with Don and Don. And Arthur Smith was the head of CBC Sports at the time, and he called me on a landline and said, look, there's critics, don't you worry. We love that you two battle on strategy. We love that Don says this and you said that. The more the better. And that kind of, first off, I didn't know how deep the camp was of how dare a woman comment on a men's game or step in on Don and Don. But I like that Arthur had my back. And so that was awesome. But having said that, no one loved Don and the late Don Whitman, who's a legend, and the wonderful Don Dugan more than me. We'd had great times. Even if I did make him carry my luggage up all those stairs of the hotel and at the Albertville Olympics.
Oh, there you go. Colleen, I was going to say, while you're officially retired, we still often can be seen on that curling show with our good friend Devin Haru, just down the riser. A CBC show that often embraces and discusses controversy. My question, over the years, we've had so many great curling controversies and interesting news developments. The JJ Kathy O split, the Rachel Homan Lisa Weigel split, the Darren Moulding Brendan Botcher split, the Brianne Harris news. Often the big TV networks tend to avoid the controversy rather than embrace it. The distinct contrast to other sports broadcasts where controversy is used to pump up the programming and serve as the main talking point. My question, why does this happen in curling? Why isn't controversy embraced?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. And I would say it has something to do with TSN maybe being a partner of Curling Canada. And so the show is just about curling rather than ignoring. I think it's a shame they're ignoring some of the big stories that have happened through the years and the drama of player splits. There have been player splits for as long as curling's happened, right? So I think that not talking about it and not having sort of an NFL panel is something that's needed. They do a great show, but it's a formula. And I think they can break with some of that formula and bring it to be a little bit more like some of the other, sports like NFL or the NHL talking. And I don't know why. I don't know why they don't find that platform. I do know the late Joan Mead would have definitely had it on the CBC weekend shows for sure. She just thought the whole story, the whole narrative is what the viewers always deserved all the time.
I'm happy that they do it that way. Leave it all to the curling reporters to write about the controversial stuff. We like nothing more than a good controversy. Isn't that right, Greg? But there's not a lot of controversy about the fact that I think you and I probably agree, Colleen. You've told me this before, that you thought Jennifer Jones was, the greatest women's curler of all time, and she's just wrapped up her career, and that's pretty incredible. I don't need you to go through that again because you've said it before, and we've talked about it several times on this show. But what I'd like to ask you is just about Rachel Homan's team this year and the run that they've put together.
Yeah.
Because this recording, they're 60-5 on the season. Get your head around that number. They went undefeated in the Scotties. They're 11-0 at the World Championship. So where does this season rank among all others you can recall? And Homan is only 34. So if she can keep going for a few more seasons, could she challenge Jennifer Jones for that greatest curler title?
Well, and Jennifer's got the title of GOAT. That's not going to last long. That ain't going to last long. I'll tell you that right now, because Rachel is going to go on a tear for years. She's finally tapped into her superpowers. She works incredibly hard. She has always been fantastic. And now she's always had great teams too. But it was Rachel herself figuring out, wow, I throw the rock better than anybody on the planet. I'm making all the shots. And now it's not that she hasn't arrived. Obviously, her legacy already is impressive, even if she just walked away tomorrow. But she is going to dominate for the next 10 years if she wants to. What did you tell me? She's 34?
Yeah.
34. So 34 to 44, she's prime time. I would say even when you look at Gushu, you could go till you're 50 if you want it. And ditto for Jennifer's age. It's like a golfer, right? You almost get better with age, the way you start understanding strategy more, and you understand what makes you tick, and you understand handling pressure. Once you've got those three things figured out, and you throw as well as Rachel, she's unstoppable. It must be intimidating for every other female team in Canada right now to look at what Rachel has done. Consistently as a team, they're like a 90%. What were they at the Scotties? Even higher. Their plus percentage when they're out curling a player is so high. So I think that Rachel's going to be the GOAT by a lot. If she's not our Olympic rep, I'll be shocked. If she doesn't win the Worlds here, I'll be shocked. And if she doesn't win the next 6 Scotties in a row, I will be shocked as well. It's hers for the taking. Yeah, she's that good.
It's an incredible thought too, Colleen, because you talk about Brad Gushue, and he wasn't even, when he was 34, he hadn't even won the Brier yet.
That's a really good point, that he hadn't won the Brier then. He really emerged, you know, it took an Olympic gold and then not a hiatus. He was trying out new thirds, and Mark had left for Winnipeg and all that sort of stuff. So he came into his superpowers late. And isn't he just like the wisest and best in Canada right now and the world in men? Like, he's just got that sureness of every throw. And he can take it up a notch like a Tom Brady when he has to, you know, get on my back. Like when Mike McEwen threatened a little bit in that 7th end. And you could see a little bit of steam coming out of Gushue's ear at that time. And he just was like, no, I'm not, this ain't going to happen on my watch. And he throws again, like Rachel, so beautifully and so pure that technically, again, a curling delivery is like having a great golf swing. You got to have it. And he's got it. And he always has had it ever since he won a Canadian Junior.
Well, Colleen, we can honestly not thank you enough for coming and joining us here on The Riser. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know you've got things to do there in the arena in Sydney. We'll let you get back to it. But again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Colleen.
Good talking to you, Ted. Good talking to you, Greg.
Ted, it's time for Hot Topics, where we explore some of the big sports issues of the day. It's been a couple weeks since we last connected, so let's catch up a little bit by getting your thoughts on the finish at the Brier.
The finish at the Brier. That was a good Brier. I thought it was really interesting early on, especially, Greg, because there was so many teams in contention. Colleen talked about it. There was all these teams in contention that you don't normally expect, like Jamie Cooey out of Northwest Territories, Tyler Smith out of Prince Edward Island, and Trevor Bonneau out of Northern Ontario. They made it really interesting, but of course, it ends up being kind of the same teams you always expect there at the end. I was shocked that my pick, Brendan Botcher, did not make it to the final. Your pick, Mike McEwen, did make it to the final, so I give you credit for getting one game further than me with your pick. But then, of course, it's Brad Gushue who rises to the top once again and wins. He's now swatted away Mike McEwen this year. Last year, he swatted away Matt Dunstone. He's just not giving in on these opportunities when he's got a chance to win it, and he's putting the hammer down and getting it done. Brad Gushue, it's so funny because we talk about the opportunity that Colleen was talking about for Rachel Homan to become the greatest curler of all time on the women's side. She's younger now than Brad Gushue was when he first won his first Brier. Just think about that. And now he just continues to win, and he's got as many as anybody in the history of the game, and he's likely going to win more because he's only 43. It's really an incredible run that his team has put together. And, I guess you just have to embrace that. Like, I know people in this country like to see different teams win. It makes it more exciting. But sometimes, like when Tiger Woods was on his greatest roll, you just wanted to see him do more of it. And I think that's the territory Brad Gushue is getting into.
Yeah, it was an interesting final. I thought, again, we touched on this earlier with Colleen. only 7 short years ago. And Brad Guzzu had not won his Brier, and now he's won 6 championships since. He won the 2017 title in St. John's on home ice. He's been just unbeatable since. Repped Canada at the Beijing Olympics. Just an incredible story, and certainly I think the favorite to represent Canada again at the 2026 games in Milan. And just a quick one on Mike McEwen. It's interesting as well. You get a player like that who still trying for that first Brier title, came so close, but he really seemed afterwards to be like, okay, this is like a step. I'm feeling like I'm in a great place. I've got a great team around me. This is the start of really good things. So let's look forward to the rest of the quad with that team, which looked really solid. Colton Flash was amazing as well, and the Marsh brothers looked great. So good things from McEwen, and a really interesting Brier all in with some great storylines throughout the week, just like the Scotties, which also delivered on the storyline front.
Yeah, and I think Mike McEwen's feeling that way because he did this with a brand new team. It's the first year he's been with that team. To take a step like that to get all the way to the Brier final is pretty meaningful when you're in that situation. But I can tell you, I talked to him after that event, and there was no doubt that he was heartbroken. There's been a lot of heartbreak for him over the years, but to come that close and then lose is probably as bad as it gets. But we got more curling to talk about as well, Greg. A very curling heavy show today, and rightly so, because you were in the building in Sydney, Nova Scotia, where the World Women's Curling Championship is going on, where Rachel Homan is once again dominating with an 11-0 record as we speak at the moment, heading into the playoffs, having the most remarkable season that I can think of in curling by anybody at 60-5 in games played. What are your takeaways from the event so far?
Yeah, we're recording this on a Friday evening, so I won't weigh in too much on what I think might happen over the next couple of days. But just in general terms, I think Rachel, as strong as her season has been, I'd argue is not the top favorite coming into this. I think you have to go with Switzerland's Silvana Tiranzoni, who has just owned this event for the last 4 editions, a 4-time defending champion. I think you have to knock the champion off her perch, and Rachel looks primed to do that. 11 wins in a row as we record this. I think her winning streak's up to 26, 27 games. I've lost track overall. Last loss was going back to a Grand Slam a couple months ago. So an incredible run of form. Everything seems to be happening. Strong front end. Tracy Fleury really blossoming in the 3rd spot, really settling in with this team. After the growing pains of that first season, they seem locked in and ready for a run for the rest of this quadrennial. So we'll see if that includes a world title, but you have to like her chances at this point. And she beat Tiranzoni to end the Swiss skip's long consecutive wins streak, I think at 42 games at this particular championship. So big things for Rachel, no doubt about it. Great to talk all that curling. I feel like that's all we've talked about. Let's transition to some NHL news. And I always find the post-game and pre-game talk interesting when you get a coach who's making, I'll say, a ballsy move. Flyers coach John Tortorella this week decided to make captain Sean Couturier a healthy scratch against Toronto, and I believe he's doing it again. 2 games, and it could go on indefinitely. Who knows? My question, though, Ted, how many coaches in the NHL have the mustard to bench one of their top players and their captain at that?
Not many that I know of, Greg, and very few have the mustard of John Tortorella in general. If there's one thing Torts has, it's mustard. And he definitely knows how to, well, I don't know, it's the wrong analogy, but he knows how to sling it. Maybe more so. Maybe I need a different word for mustard there, but he honestly, I don't think many coaches would do it. I know a lot of fans in certain markets that I can think of have talked about this as, that's what you want to see sometimes. If a leader on the team, or a leading scorer, or a player who is supposed to be one of the highest paid players and is supposed to be leading the way, is dogging it, or isn't getting the job done, or is bringing the team down in some way, sit them. Don't let them still be in control of everything by being out there. And I think a lot of people would applaud what John Tortorella has done with Sean Couturier. Now, I don't know that situation super well. I don't know exactly what John Tortorella was thinking when he made that move with Sean Couturier. If it was all just about average play or poor play or perhaps some locker room situation. I don't know that, but I do agree with what you're saying. That it's a ballsy move right here in Winnipeg. Paul Maurice was the coach for years, and people always complained about the fact that he wouldn't ever dare make a move like that, wouldn't ever dare put Blake Wheeler on the third line or put Blake Wheeler on the fourth line if they felt like his play was declining. He was the captain and he needed to get his minutes, and that always happened. Now, again, that's a dynamic between the player and the coach that I'm not privy to exactly what it was, but from the outside, I think there were a lot of people that wished he would do more in that way. So in this particular case, and I believe the Flyers won their game, so I don't know what in the world people would complain about otherwise. If a coach makes a decision and takes a player out and they win, then he's made the right decision, has he not?
Yeah, for sure. And it's, healthy scratch of a captain. I can't think of the last time that's happened, but it's the way Tortorella and the media have handled it has been fascinating to watch, because they ask him, why is your captain going to be in the lineup tonight? What's going on? What's the reaction been? And he hasn't addressed it. He won't talk about it. So kept keeping it in-house, but it's just a real eyebrow-raising move to healthy scratch a captain. I can't recall the last time that's happened.
Imagine Torts being difficult with the media, Greg.
I know.
How has that ever happened before?
He hasn't changed. He's been remarkably consistent. I covered that 2004 Stanley Cup final between the Lightning and the Calgary Flames. And I loved it, because if you weren't getting a 5-word answer, which are sometimes the best quotes, you're getting a no comment. Let's move on, which is, I don't know. I enjoy it. Maybe I'm alone on that one. I don't know. But I dig a salty coach who's not afraid to just lay it out there, lay his thoughts out there. Give me more of that.
Yeah, and you know what else we both love in our many years in this industry is a wild and crazy story, and there's one definitely developing down in Los Angeles. And so, Greg, I just wanted to ask you about Shohei Ohtani and the media situation in wake of his interpreter's firing. That is a crazy story, man. I'm telling you, I've been reading about it all day, and it's just absolutely bizarre. So after the news broke, Ohtani's locker was essentially guarded by team PR staff, and the player left after the game without even talking to reporters. So what do you make of all that?
Fascinating. I agree with you. Full on. It is an incredible story, like one that will be only snowballing over the coming days. And full marks to, I believe, ESPN and the Los Angeles Times that really got that off the ground. And now, yes, his longtime interpreter and close friend has been fired by the Dodgers. What I really wanted to talk to you about, Ted, is how the team's communication staff handled that and how the athlete handled that situation, where he had a game to play with all this news breaking and a post-game availability. And yeah, from what I read, the team PR staff were stationed outside his locker and just were like there to fend off any media questions, like he was not discussing it. So, my takeaway on that is we are in a day and age where the athlete, the coach, the GM, whoever it might be, they don't really need to talk. They don't really need to. What they often do is talk but say nothing. So what are you getting? You've got what Ohtani did the other night, which essentially he said goodnight to the reporters as he walked away. I know that it's mandated in a lot of leagues and events. Athletes do have to make some time for the reporters, for the assembled media. But we've seen on a number of occasions in a number of different sports where they actually will talk to you, but say something like next question, or I'm not interested in talking about that. And it's, as reporters, it makes you go to other people to get comments about what's actually happening rather than the source. So it can be challenging, but it's going to be a story to watch how the Los Angeles media, obviously a major market, and the Dodgers, a huge team in MLB, how that is handled over the coming weeks, because they are not off to a good start with regards to media athlete dynamics there, given the enormity of the story, but also a $700 million player who's not talking. Fascinating.
I'm just here so I don't get fined. I honestly, Greg,
That's right. That's right.
that was the biggest story of the year. Him signing that contract with Los Angeles, with the Dodgers. It was the biggest story in Toronto, and it was the biggest story in America. It was the biggest story in Japan. It's a massive, massive story that he signed a $700 million contract. The chase for Ohtani was something with millions and millions of gallons of ink was spilled upon. And then it comes out that his interpreter has been fired, and there's illegal gambling involved, and there's all kinds of craziness. And yeah, Shohei did this. No, Shohei didn't do this. And nobody seems to know what is going on. It's just an absolute massively crazy story at this point. As you said, it's just going to grow and grow. But what bugs you and what bugs me is that leagues like MLB, the NHL, NFL, everybody, they have policies that players are supposed to speak after games when they come out. And it's being circumvented more and more and more. Now, this is a big game or a big situation. It's certainly a unusual situation. I think there is almost a little bit of understanding as to that maybe that's just not the time or place to be asking those questions, so they're avoiding that entirely. But on a smaller picture, there's a problem across the sport of, I think, teams not adhering to those kind of media policies and players deciding whether they feel like they should talk or not. Also, teams deciding, well, we're just going to limit it to 3 players that are available today. So that's it. Well, they're actually all supposed to be available. So they're taking away more of what the independent media has an opportunity to do. And that bothers me. And I'm sure some people will be doing the world's smallest violin for Wyman, but I personally think that that's crappy.
I agree. We're in the business of telling stories, and it can be made more difficult when these athletes, front office members, elect not to talk in an extended way, put it to you that way. But it's, I think we're up for that challenge when it does appear. I mean, 98% of the time, these athletes, these GMs, these coaches are keen to chat, and I think they somewhat enjoy some of the availability. Sometimes others obviously don't. You get your 18-second cliches. That's going to happen. But in general terms, I think you do get that occasional situation where you're dying to hear from the subject at the heart of a story, and they don't talk. And that's what happened here. And I'd love to chat with some of the good folks in Los Angeles on the various baseball beats down there and get their take on things. But maybe that'll be episode 11. Try and land someone from the LA Times. Let's transition again, Ted. And sad news this week with 2 NHL players passing, both from apparent suicides. It's been an unfortunate storyline for years in a variety of sports, particularly hockey, football, pro wrestling. In general, is enough being done to keep the spotlight on things like concussions, CTE, and the dangers that can come with playing professional contact sports?
No, not enough is not being done. And in hockey, especially, we've talked about this 2 times previously on the Riser about fighting in the sport of hockey and about the dangers of people taking these punches to the head. And it just angers me. We're talking about Matt Rempe, who's just come into the league. He's fought a zillion times. He's now been suspended since the last time we talked. He's, everybody's so excited about this guy because he's willing to fight everybody. And yet here we are again, just after that great excitement about this new guy who wants to fight. You've got guys taking their own lives. And Chris Simon in particular, we know it had a lot to do with the fact that he was an enforcer in the National Hockey League, that he took an incredible amount of blows being a fighter, that he struggled with the same kind of substance abuse that other players before him have, and that he has died far too young from suicide, confirmed by his family. And his family, of course, suspects that he does have CTE. And it would not be at all shocking if he does. We don't know it for sure. But the National Hockey League has never, in my mind, done enough to help their own players with the dangers of concussion And I think banning fighting from the game would make a difference in that area. And I really, I feel very passionate about that. And I talked with you on the riser a couple of times before about how I still enjoy the entertainment of the fighting, and I do, but that's hypocritical because it just shouldn't be this way. You know, Bob Probert died too young. Wade Belak died too young. Rick Rippon died too young. You can name others that have gone, and in many cases it was similar issues. It was brain injury problems, it was depression, it was serious mental illness, it was drug abuse, it was all these things that seemed to be tied together. And I just, how many more times does it have to happen, Greg? And it's not just about hockey, it's about all sports, but how many more times does it have to happen before something is truly done? I mean, you can't, I'm not saying you have to take away hitting in football and just play flag football. And I'm not saying you have to take away body checking in the NHL. But that fighting is something you can take away and it won't destroy your game. So do something, people. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I remember 5-10 years ago, maybe, when concussions really came to the forefront as a news story in the sports media business and remained there for several years. And the leagues made significant changes, depending on the league, to try to address it and to try to make things better. And in the last couple of years, it seems like few people are talking about concussions and head injuries the way they did 9 or 10 years ago. And I'm curious why that is, because I think, to me, it's a story that should remain on the front burner, and we need to keep talking about it. And it goes for a variety of sports. It's not just the enforcer in the NHL. It could be the slopestyle skier who's competing on a hill and smacks their head after trying some crazy trick. There's all kinds of sports where head injury, head trauma is still an issue. And I think it's up to us, frankly, in the sports media business, to dig into these stories and to keep reporting it and keep it on the front burner, because it's important. And I think we still need to see change across the sports world when it comes to this, because it's not going away.
Well, I assure you, Gary Bettman and the National Hockey League forefathers are happy when people are not talking about it. That's exactly what they were going for with all of this, is to just not have that be discussed so much. And to go into that a little further with that, with all the discussions we've talked about on the riser many times, this again brings into focus the value and importance of independent media. If it's the National Hockey League's media only that's working for national NHL.com, how much are they reporting on something like this? How much are they reporting on the dangers of something like this? They're probably not at all. If anything, they might mention, in passing. You need independent media to make sure questions are asked about situations like this. And I can only hope that, people who consume media understand the difference between organizations that are part of the league or the team involved and organizations who are independent and are just trying to get the story entirely correct.
Well, that could be a topic for a future riser podcast, because it's interesting to me how kind of mesh in that gray area where you have leagues. I mean, you see it here at the curling. There's most of the folks on the media bench are content creators for the various federations that are on site here, and not independent media, not working traditional journalists, if you will. We have a lot of friends who've gone to NHL.com, MLB.com, and certainly valuable and certainly well read. But great point. Are they going to do that deep dive into something controversial in their sport, involving their league or their team, whatever the case may be? That's where I think the sports news consumer might be a little unsure as to who's media, who's not, who's creating content. Where do we draw the line? An interesting one. So perhaps we can do that on episode 11. So I have some thoughts.
Well,
shall we transition? Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I look forward to that, Greg. Obviously, I think all of our discussions on this are very interesting, and I think that we'll continue to dig into it as long as we possibly can during this show, because it's very important to us and to many of our colleagues to make that differentiation. But right now, let's switch to your favorite segment. What do you think? We're going to get into the all-timers, where we tell some stories about our time in the business. And I'm going to set up Greg for his story, and I think it's got something to do with curling again, Greg. Somehow that has really been the theme. You got something about Colleen Jones, and it's from the 2008 Beijing Olympics?
Yeah, it was the first time I met Colleen Jones. It was in 2008 at the Beijing Games, Summer Olympics. That time around, of course, they hosted winter edition in 2022. But in 2008, I staffed, along with a couple CPers, I think Donna Spencer was there. It was the flag raising before the games start, which happened in the Athletes Village, I think, that year. And it was maybe 40-minute drive from the main Olympic Stadium area in Beijing. And so at that event, we have to put our media passes in an area, and then we go to the village and you come back. And it's not your traditional Olympic setup where you just hop on a media bus and go about your business. It's much different, and it's just kind of a one-off. And so let's go staff the flag raising. And on the way back, we get our gear, and we're one of the last few reporter groups out of the venue that day. And we realized there's no shuttle buses. And this is well before iPhones. We had flip phones, I think. But, how are you going to get a cab, or how are you going to get transport back? We were expecting some kind of bus or something, and it didn't happen. And there was Colleen Jones with the CBC at the time. And she knew Donna Spencer, of course, from their curling days. And she said, "Oh, hey, Donna, how are you?" And we got chatting, and I was introduced to Colleen and her cameraman and a couple of the other crew. And Donna and I realized, we don't have a ride back here. This is terrible. And Colleen made a point. She goes, "You guys don't have a ride back. Hop in the back with us." And made room in this tiny van. And we got our stuff in. And she's like, "We're not going anywhere until you guys have a ride." And was kind enough to make sure we got back to the main drag. I don't know how we would have done it otherwise. And that was my first experience with Colleen. Just a great person. Made sure that everyone was taken care of. It was priority one for her. So thanks, Colleen, for that night. We didn't have to spend the night somewhere in the weeds in the middle of nowhere in China. And great to have her on today. Tops.
Salt of the earth, Colleen, by the way. For anybody who doesn't know, I know back in the day, I used to remember watching on TV, and I remember hearing comments from people, and it seemed like people didn't like her. It was like, for some reason, they didn't like the way her personality came across on television when she was skipping. And not everybody, obviously, but some people. And I didn't know any better, because that's all I knew about her was what I saw and what some people had opinions about her. Then I started doing stories on her and meeting her and talking to her in events, and I was just like, how could you not like this person? I mean, she is just one of the smartest, nicest, most most accommodating people in sports that you and I have dealt with. And so, of course, and your story just adds to that belief for me. And I've got a different little story too. And guess what? Guess what sport it's about? You don't even have to say it. It's about curling. We're going to get one more curling story. And so this is a funny one. This is from 2020, the Brier in Kingston, Ontario. It was just before the pandemic. I mean, I got home from that event 3 days before the pandemic shut down. Like, it was almost like we barely got out of there in time. So that was pretty great to have been able to get home. But it was my way there that was the story that amazed me. And that was heading to the airport on Thursday night. So the event would have started on a Friday with a wild card game. And it's Thursday night, so I head to the airport for my flight. It's supposed to be boarding already. It's a little bit delayed. And all of a sudden, of course, boom. Actually, this flight's canceled. We can't get a time to land in Toronto. I was going to Toronto and then on to Kingston. So, no, we're not going tonight. So I'm on the phone with my travel agent. They go, "Okay, we can get you on another flight tomorrow morning." It's like, okay, no problem. I go home, go to sleep. I get up, go to the airport. Almost the exact same thing, Greg. Like, right up until it's about time to get on the plane, all of a sudden, boom, no, mechanical issue, cancel. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, unbelievable already. So I go home. I get on a flight that leaves Winnipeg at 5 o'clock, I think, or something in the evening. Now, the game starts at probably 6 o'clock in Kingston. or 7 o'clock in Kingston, which is 6 o'clock Winnipeg time. So I'm already in some hot water on this one. But my flight that I'm on is going to Ottawa. So I now fly to Ottawa, where I have to rent a vehicle and then drive to Kingston. And I get there, and the only vehicle they've got for me is like a freaking half-ton truck, one of the biggest ones you've ever seen in your life. It was just this huge vehicle. It was insane. It's all they had. So I hop into this thing and I hit the highway. The game is like well on already, and I'm driving. It's not that far from Ottawa to Kingston, but it's snowing. It's actually like a pretty crappy visibility night. So I'm cruising down this highway in this truck in lousy visibility. And I'm thinking, what am I doing here? Like, I'm really rushing to get to this wildcard game. And I get to Kingston and I had to take the car. There was nowhere to park anywhere near the stadium. So I had to take it to the hotel, which was a few blocks away. And, and of course, I get in there, I check in. I've now got maybe 40 minutes to get back to the arena. And they say, well, you can't leave your car on the street out there. You got to park it in the parkade. So now I go and I start to go park it in the parkade. This truck is too big for the parkade. Like it won't even get in under the thing. So I'm like, it's touching the bar, and I'm like, oh god. So I got to back out. I have no idea where I'm supposed to go, and I'm going and parking in some crazy parking lot for like $25 for the night, and then run to the arena. And you were saving my seat sitting right next to you there. And I got in and I got through the accreditation thing. I had to pick up my accreditation. I didn't even have it yet. Got in, and I swear to God, Mike McEwen was throwing the winning rock as I walked onto the media bench, and you guys were like just about to get up and go walk down to the scrum. And he beat Glenn Howard in that wild card game. And I just grabbed my stuff out of my bag, walked down there, and started doing interviews. And I'd only been there for about 30 seconds after that crazy day. And I don't think my story probably didn't seem that different to the readers back home. It's just an interesting way that it all turned out.
I remember that now that you share that. That was a remarkable Brier. And of course, we were in touch on the Wednesday after that Brier because we were going to go to the World Women's, right? In Prince George, wherever it was.
Flights
and then the world shut down that Thursday, right?
Yep.
Yeah, wild. But yeah, thanks for that all-timer. That's a beauty. Let's put a bow on it, Ted. I'd like to give special thanks to you, to Colleen Jones, also producer Alex Antoniadis, the Toronto Metropolitan University Podcast Lab, and our social media intern, Ryan McMahon. Music's by Tuesday Night Jam, and logo design by John St. Clair. Follow us on your favorite social media platform, and please subscribe to this podcast. Thank you.